Right. Good. Welcome to this week's live broadcast from Dharma Retreat Centre in Scotland. This is the second of our new weekly broadcast on a Wednesday morning from me. And I'm Smritiratna, and I'm one of the teachers at Dharma. And what we'll do this week, we'll have a period in a minute just for some meditation, which I'll lead for a few minutes. And then I'm going to give a talk lasting about 30 minutes, possibly 40 at the outside. And then we'll have another little meditation for a few minutes. And then we can all wave goodbye. So I'm not going to attempt another discussion period like we had last week, because with 75 people, it's quite hard to manage that. And it's quite hard for Zoom to kind of handle it all as well. I had a bit of trouble last week with muting and unmuting. So this week I'm going to keep it simple and just have a talk with a meditation before and after, just so you know what to expect. So in the ancient time-honored way with the Buddhist tradition, let's start by just settling down for a little bit of quiet time before the teaching. It's a very traditional way for the Buddhists to do that sort of thing. So wherever you are, you have the ground beneath you. I love to introduce meditations with that sense of just opening to that sense of steady grounding support from the earth, which is there for all of us. And just getting a sense of settling into the sense of your own body, supported by the earth. Just a sense of our togetherness as well. There are already over 50 people here in the meeting. And we're all aware of this together. We're all connected. So just aware of your own body as you sit here, and aware of that sense of connection and company. Sense of being connected into Dharma once more. And linked into lots of other people who've been on Dharma retreats. And see if you can let go of everything else. Let go of texting and worrying, and just let go of everything else and just settle into this present, simple moment, feeling your own body, letting yourself completely settle down, letting your weight be supported. And especially on the out breath, Just letting it be a long sigh of relief as you settle down into this sense of presence. And this sense of being together today with all of us. Right, well, I hope you feel a bit more settled now, and I'm going to now share with you some of my reflections over the last few days. It's a beautiful spring morning here at Dharma. It's got some sunny intervals which we've been enjoying, and the daffodils are out, and the plum tree has burst into blossom. And I walked over there to have a really good look at the plum tree, so I could tell you about her. And there were some bees busy at work. And as I walked away from the tree, a big bumblebee came after me and just circled round and round and round as I was walking away, as if in greeting. So I'd like to say hello from Dharmakosha and the daffodils and the plum tree and the bumblebee. Haste you back. We're looking forward to seeing you again when all this is over and Dharmakosha is reopened, and looking forward to seeing you again. But for the time being, we can still be together, at least in imagination. You can, at least in imagination, be here with me at Dharmakosha just now, and we can be together. So yes, I want to share my reflections over the last few days since I gave my last talk last week, which I believe has now been uploaded, so you can hear it in audio. The Zoom video recording, we didn't get that to work, but at least you can listen to me. And last week I gave a talk called 7 Basics at a Time of Deprivation. So just some basic practices and principles to respond creatively to the new situation you find yourself in, whatever that happens to be for you in this pandemic. A lot of us are confined to our houses. Some of us are going out working extra hard, working in the health and the caring industries or the food industries or delivering. It's different for all of us. Some of us are looking after children at home and it's quite hectic and noisy, homeschooling. And some of us are on our own and self-isolating. If you are in frail health and elderly, perhaps, maybe you're doing that for 3 months and it's a long period of solitude for you. And that's the new situation you're having to adapt to. But I hope those 7 basics at a time of deprivation has been useful to you. And if you haven't listened to it, then check in and you can listen to that. So last week, I just wanted to remind people of the really basic, simple principles and practices that we share at Dharmakosha. And the first one was called Welcome the Opportunity for Training. And I explained that this is a principle that runs right through the Buddhist tradition, that whatever arises in life, you just turn towards it and you welcome it as an opportunity for training, whatever it happens to be. Even challenges, even difficult things are an opportunity for training. An opportunity for training the heart-mind, because in the Buddhist tradition, this is what counts. If you can work with the heart-mind and learn how to maintain your heart-mind in a state of steadiness and openness and creativity and empathy, then you are responding to whatever arises in the best possible way. And that's a key principle in the Buddhist tradition that I'm going to keep on returning to over and over again. So this week, let's continue to respond creatively and well. Let's maintain our mental state, our emotional state, and our body as well as we can, the whole body mind, so that we can respond well to what's happening. And by doing so, we may come up with some new ideas or ways of living in this period, which will sustain us long after this pandemic has passed into history. And I think it will go down in British history, just as the Second World War has gone down in British history, where it was a challenging time for all of us, but I hope we can look back and remember it as a time when we pulled together and we thought commonly and looked after each other. And new things came out of that time, just as new things came out of the wartime experience. I mean, after the Second World War, the rise of the suffragette movement came out of that. And a few years later, there were votes for women. And after the Second World War, a lot of new things came out of that as well. So there are new things that will arise, that we'll discover and realize, and they will see us through. So the talk today is resources for a better future. And it's about just encouraging all of us to resource ourselves at this time, both to cope with this situation and also resources for the life that is to come after this pandemic has finished. So just now we are settling into what is becoming the new normal, isn't it? And you may have a new normal, which is solitude, a long period of solitude. But we know about that in the Buddhist tradition. We have a long tradition of hermits and how to really make the best of solitude. Ryokan, for example, lived in a hut in a forest in Japan at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. And I often quote his poems when people come on retreat here. But he learned that he wasn't alone even when there were no human beings about, because there were the trees and the birds and the mountains and the stream. And he found a way of communing with those. And you can really appreciate nature at a time like this. You may not be able to go out very much. You may be one of the lucky ones who has a garden or an allotment to go down to. But even if you're cooped up inside, I was sharing last week how you can use your imagination to get a sense of being part of nature, and you can see nature through the window. And it's very important to remember that nature is still there for you. It's one of the ways we can resource ourselves. So let's compare this time to what it's like to come on retreat, because there is actually a strange parallel going on here. When you come on retreat, you have to let go of a lot of your usual familiar surroundings and your little cozy little home and the things that you're used to, and you give up a lot of things. But then you enter into a new phase for a week where you have renounced quite a lot in your life, and you're living much more simply. You're living without the sort of things you're normally used to, but there are new things to learn, new skills, new friends to meet, and new realizations to have about life. And it's like this with the pandemic too. So we've let go of a lot of our usual routines, and we're having to learn new things. So your usual entertainments, your usual ways of meeting people, a lot of them have gone when you come on retreat. And it's like that, not necessarily the same things you're letting go, but also letting go of something. And then towards the end of a retreat, when I'm leading a retreat, I always have an evening where people just consider what they've gained from this retreat and what they can carry forward into life after the retreat, and prepare themselves for a better future after the retreat's finished. And I think especially once you've really settled down into the new situation, and found a way in which you can just calm down and steady out into it, you can start to think creatively and insightfully into what you can do better in this situation, and also what you can learn for the life after the pandemic has finished. I already know people who are learning new things right now. I have a friend in Glasgow who had been feeling quite trapped by his livelihood, for example. He has been a taxi driver in Glasgow, and over the years, it's become harder and harder to make a living, and he's had to work longer and longer hours. And the insurance has gone up, and it's been getting more and more expensive, and he's just working longer and longer hours and coming home really tired out. And he's just thinking, I really must get out of this and find a better way of making a living. But he's so tired and so sort of ground down by the routines of it all, and a sense of being kind of locked into it. And then suddenly a few weeks ago, after the social distancing measures came in, suddenly he couldn't get any work as a taxi driver. And so he just decided, okay, I quit now. And then he just had a few days of just resting at home, and then used the spare time he had to figure out what else he could do. And partly because he is a meditator and he knows how to really calm down and enter into quite a sort of pondering, reflective, contemplative state, he was able to just mull things over, turn it over into his mind, and come up with quite a number of really good ideas. And to cut a long story short, he's now got a new livelihood teaching English as a foreign language. He just remembered that years ago he used to do that when he was much younger, and he spent 2 years in Japan, and he even got a TEFL qualification. And now we have video conferencing. He doesn't have to travel to Japan, and even while he's social distancing, he can do that. So shortly he's going to start work in his new job, and he's going to be teaching English from his own home. So that's an example of something good that has come out of the pandemic so far. And although people have been losing their livelihoods, which is a very sad thing, and it's caused a lot of suffering, there are other people who are discovering new livelihoods and new skills to learn. For example, I've been figuring out how to become really skilled in leading online discussion groups. So we've started our Mitra discussion group that meets up in Stirling. Formerly, I've had to drive down the road to Stirling and meet them, and they've had to drive to meet me, and not everybody can make it. But now, the last time we had one of our best turnouts because we just met online, and there was even somebody in Germany who certainly wouldn't have been able to be there, and she was able to come along too, and we all really enjoyed it. And I've just discovered a new book called Leading Groups Online, which has just been published this month by some fantastic people in America who've been specializing in doing this for years. I don't have the details to hand, unfortunately, but if you put leading groups online into Google and new book or something, I'm sure you'll find it. I've had a peek and it looks really good. So I'm really enthusiastic about learning a new set of skills to do this really, really well. Because it's not just a matter of communicating with each other online, but doing it in a really good quality way. The Buddha used to talk about how to do this, not just speaking the truth, but speaking with harmony, speaking helpfully and meaningfully, and also speaking with kindness. And we need, I mean, these are ancient principles that are good for building community at all times. And so it's not so easy to enter into rapport and harmony and empathy when you're doing it online, but it is possible. And using this book, I'm planning to find out how to do it. So that's a whole new set of skills, and we can continue to meet up for friendship, for work, for training, for education, for therapy, for all sorts of reasons. But we have to figure out how to do it in this new way. And then thirdly, a new set of skills this pandemic is demanding of us is how to manage our anxiety, because it's an emergency situation. And in any emergency situation, people have a tendency to panic and get anxious. And then when people panic and get anxious, they are in reactive mind. And then they can so easily either panic and then sort of contract into selfishness and just think only of themselves and don't think of other people. But they can also lose their temper and get impatient with other people too, and end up sort of like snapping and just being really irritated with people, or getting into arguments and blaming people. And it's really just so unhelpful to do that, all of that. If we can find a way of calming down and entering into an open-hearted, insightful state, which is always a possibility for human beings, then we can turn towards the present situation well. So this is something that Buddhist teachers come back to over and over again, because it's an absolute key principle within the whole Buddha tradition ever since the Buddha began teaching. That whatever's happening, if you get triggered off into reactive mind and caught up in all that anxiety, and then your thoughts are driven by that anxiety and you're just worrying, or if you're triggered into anger and then your thoughts are driven by that anger and you're just into endless blaming and grievance, then it's something people can get locked into and feel dominated by. Yet it's also something that people can learn to recognize and drop out of. So dropping out of reactive mind into the stillness and openness and rich creativity of creative mind. Always possible to do that. As if that open, kindly, gentle space is always there for you. When we're uptight, it's a bit like we're sort of like locked into this, we're sort of hooked up in some way, aren't we, with this uptight state. But if we can let go and drop down into creative mind, it's a bit like it's there for us. This openness, this tenderness, this sense of peace. And then we can recover ourselves a sense of, oh, thank goodness. I've regained my composure, my wits, and now I can see how I can respond well. So learning how to do this is absolutely crucial for all human beings at all times. But when we're in a crisis situation like this, it's even more important to learn how to manage our emotional states. And many times over the last few weeks, I'm sure I'm not alone in finding myself really triggered into panic and anxiety by the news coming over from the media. And I've learned, for example, in the last few weeks to be very careful what I take in just before I go to bed. So a few weeks ago, I was listening to something on the news, and really, I was just had such a disturbed night. I was worrying and worrying about it all night. But over the last week or so, I've entered into a habit of putting on a CD of medieval chanting. So it's like Gregorian chanting and beautiful mass by Macho. And it just creates this incredible reflective meditative atmosphere in my forest cabin where I live, so that I can just do my normal bedtime things of making myself a hot drink and a hot water bottle and setting the fire ready for the morning and soaking the porridge. And then I sit down at my shrine and light the candles and switch off the music, and I'm all set to go into a meditation. And that sees me through into having a really good night's sleep. And then I'm at my best for the day after. It's things like that, learning how important it is to manage your mind in that kind of a way, and making sure you build those things into your routine. So whatever your new routine happens to be since the pandemic, make sure you set aside time for meditation and take care of what you do to set yourself up for meditation so that you're in a mood to enter into it quite smoothly and easily. And then when the meditation's finished, take care to manage your mind. So meditation practice and mindfulness practice are even more important during this crisis. And one of the effects of managing your mind to maintain as much of the time as possible a tranquil, steady mind, a patient mind, and is that with that kind of mind state, you can see things more clearly. You have better insights into the situation, and you can make wise choices, both for your own sake and for the people around you as well. And if you're living with a family and you're the only person in the family who is able to do this, then it's even more important that at least you do it. There's an old poem from the 19th century by Rudyard Kipling, and one of the lines in it is, "If you can keep your head while all around you men are losing theirs." And that is something that we can really bear in mind, that principle that even if other people are losing it, it's really important that you don't lose it. You kind of regain your composure when you need to. So if we can do this during the pandemic, if we can really work with ourselves very carefully in this way, then the chances are that we'll make good choices during the pandemic to make creative use of our time. And we'll also have some times when we can just ponder on the life that we'd like to have when all this is over. It doesn't need to be the same as it was before. In some ways it cannot be the same anyway, but you can think about improvements you'd like to make. And already you can see ahead, it won't be the same. There's actually a new radio series starting on weekly, I think it's a weekly radio series starting on Radio 4, which is the first one's tonight. And I can't remember the name of it, but it's a series on what life will be like after the pandemic finishes. And we know that this pandemic has triggered off a global recession. The World Bank announced that a few days ago, so it's official. And we know that a lot of people have already lost their jobs, and a lot of businesses are not going to survive this. So there's a lot of suffering has already come out of this. And if you look ahead in a really bleak, negative, depressive way, you'll probably see that as a future to come. Oh no, another recession, another 10 years of austerity. It's going to be really dreadful. But if that's all you think, and if that's all you see, then you're really locking yourself into quite a sort of pessimistic, gloomy state, because the future is always open and there are many possibilities, including positive things that can arise. I mean, for example, as people learn new skills in online communication and new ways of cooperating together, that means that a lot of people start realizing we don't have to commute into an office every day, and we can do so much more through online meetings. Now that we've got really good at it, we could just go in to the office maybe once a week and just have a team day together, or even once a month, and just really make the most of that time. And when we're traveling together, we won't just sit at desks looking at screens. We'll actually talk to each other and meet and do all sorts of interactive things together. So I can imagine that after the pandemic finishes, there'll be new ways of working together and new livelihoods emerging, like my friend in Glasgow that I was telling you about. And people realizing that they don't have to fly to other countries to do their livelihood and have their meetings. So I'm hoping that there'll be less commuting and less air travel, which means less carbon emissions. I think that's definitely a step in the right direction. And meanwhile, since the pandemic has started, we've all been very delighted to recognize new sense of new things happening in our society as well. There's a new sense of national unity, which we've been missing for the last 3 years since the Brexit, whatever you call it, since the Brexit business, which isn't over, of course, but we've been struggling to just agree with each other. There's been so much division and discord and conflict and divisiveness. But now this shared crisis that we're in has had the effect of pulling us all together. Something similar happened during the Second World War, but there was a big price to pay for that. There was a lot of death and destruction. And while the war was going on, there was a lot of propaganda to hate entire nations full of people. You know, hating, in this country, it was hating the Germans and the Japanese. And in Germany, it was hating the British and the Americans, and so on and so forth. But now we're actually pulling together and looking after each other. But actually, we're not dominated by hatred at the same time. It's brilliant, isn't it, what's going on? I mean, the government put out a call for volunteers to support the health workers, hoping for 200,000, and they got 500,000 in no time at all. And now we have this communal campaign called Clap for Our Carers that a Dutch yoga teacher in London came up with last week, I think it was. She knew it was going on in Holland, so now it's it's going on in Britain. So last Thursday, Kay was telling me that when she was in Glasgow, standing on her doorstep and clapping at 8 p.m. on a Thursday evening, and she could hear this applause in all directions across the city and people popping their horns, and it was very, very moving experience, a sense of gratitude and community, a new sense of community and a new sense of gratitude. This is wonderful that these qualities are emerging in our society. And it's not just our society either. My friend Ian said that his niece had a similar experience in Paris, coming out on the balcony of her tenement flat and having all of the whole tenement doing it together and kind of like waving at each other. So a lot of good things are coming out of the experience of being in this pandemic. And if we can recognize the good things and also work with our mental state to spend as much time as possible in that steady, calm, grounded, reflective state of mind, that kindly, communal kind of state of mind, then we can find even more good things to discover and learn at this time, and we can spend more time meditating perhaps and more time contemplating the situation we have now and how to live this better, but also contemplating the life we'd like to have and the society that we'd like to have and the world we'd like to have after the pandemic has finished. Now, there's something going on across the whole world. I don't know if you've realized this, a lot of people have, that business as usual across the world has suddenly stopped. And millions of people in many different countries around the world have been jolted out of their old routines and the kind of habitual attitudes that locks you into. Attitudes like, well, I have to commute every day because that's my job. I have to drive my car, I have to use the train, I have to use the bus, I have to fly because my job. And that's the way it is, and there's only one way to do it. And anyway, I haven't got time to be thinking about all this, I've got to go now, bye. You know, people get kind of locked into assumptions and beliefs about how life has to be because they don't have time to think outside the box. And because they're locked into a routine that locks them into a whole set of habitual routines and habitual attitudes and habitual ways of thinking, and everybody's kind of going round and round, and they're not able to free themselves into the new way of thinking and the new set of priorities that the future is requiring of us at this time of human history, which is the time of human history of climate change. And I, for one, hope that this pandemic will help us to let go of a lot of old ways of doing things and give us a bit of time to open up to some new ways of doing things so that we can live our lives better when somebody takes their finger off the pause button and we can get back on with life after the pandemic. And I very much hope that it will be a better life for all of us and a better society and a better world for us to live in. The old Buddhist principle is welcome every opportunity as an opportunity for training, for becoming a better person, a better human being, more insightful, more creative, more compassionate, better able to see the situation you're in clearly and make better choices. And at a time of danger, at a time of crisis, people can either go two ways. They can either contract into ruthless, small-minded selfishness, or they can expand into heroic generosity and a new cooperation and sense of community that can transcend our differences. And every human being, to some extent, has a choice about which way they go. And even when you feel as if you have no choice and you're driven and you're driven and you're driven by reactive mind, it doesn't go on forever. And after a while, if things just calm down, or maybe you go to sleep and wake up the next day, you have a moment where you do have a choice. And then again, you can choose to turn towards creative mind, open heart, and that possibility that is always there for us, which in its fullness, in its full blossoming, is Buddha mind as a potential for all of us. So that's all I've got to say this week, and I hope you find some of those reflections interesting. I'd be interested in any feedback you have from the talk, and I'm not going to do it as a live discussion this time, but if you do have any reflections you'd like to share in response to anything I've said, I'd be really interested to read them. So you can message them into the Dharmakosha Facebook page, or you can send them by email to Dharmakosha and they'll forward them to me. Or, you could send messages through this Zoom meeting. That's another way of doing it, and I'll read them afterwards. But I would be interested to know how you feel about it. But for the time being, let's just settle down into stillness again. A sense of just making sure you take this opportunity to, at least for the time being while we're together, to have a sense of peace and stillness. And just do a little meditation before we finish the meeting. So letting some of those reflections just drop down into a deeper place. As you let your body drop down into the tender stillness of the steady earth, you can let your mind drop down into the warm openness of creative mind, as if it's there waiting to receive you. Something that's possible whenever you're in that het-up state. Just let go of the thoughts, let go of the worries, and drop down into tender stillness once more. And the out breath, like a long sigh of relief, a long warm sigh of relief, helps you to do that. The out breath too is always there for you, helping you to let go and settle down. So we have the earth supporting us in its beautiful steadiness and stillness, and we have the out-breath. We have the resources we need, and above all, we have this beautiful potential that every human being shares, the potential for Buddhahood, the potential for creative mind, wise and empathic and compassionate mind, which in its fullness is Buddha mind. So let's just not forget that. And I'm going to now stop the recording and then put everybody back onto, unmute everybody. Sorry, I'll leave everybody muted, but we can go back into gallery view and then just wave at each other and end the meeting that way.